Hey everyone, this is Mac Purley. Welcome back to Lawyers Mediators International Talk Show, where we talk about law and conflict resolution topics to educate the public and everyday people. So today I am back with Andy Semotiuk. And Andy, how are you doing today?
Fantastic and great to be on the program again.
Yes, thank you, Andy, for coming on. So you are our in-house expert on all things immigration and international law. And so wanted to have you back to talk about some of the latest updates. First off, Happy New Year. It's been a while and there's a lot that's happened. It seems like we just take a little bit of a break and then we're coming back to talk full-blown international dictator seizures and
Yeah,
peace deals blowing up. There's all sorts of things going on around the world. But
yeah.
first, let's just recap about who you are so people can know you a little bit more who might not be familiar with you. So, Andy, let me give you just a minute to share a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm a U.S. and Canadian immigration attorney. I've been practicing for over 4 decades. I write for Forbes on immigration and also on international law. I practice law both in the United States and Canada, 10 years in Los Angeles, 5 years in New York. Currently, I work with Pace Law Firm in Toronto, Canada. Hopefully, that'll sort of set the stage.
Thank you so much for all the times you have come and talked to us. Last year, you did a lot of speaking about Ukraine, for example, and what's happening in Gaza. Um, this year, right when we came into 2026, we of course got the news about the head of state in Venezuela being captured by the US. And so you're recently publishing an article on Forbes, and I'll share my screen in a minute, where you wrote Maduro's seizure sets a dangerous precedent for international law. Can you go ahead and share a little bit about this and give us your thoughts about what recently happened and what you mean by setting a dangerous precedent?
Okay, well, for starters, I doubt very many people are very supportive of Maduro outside of Venezuela because he's been essentially a dictator for 26 years or so. So that part is perhaps understandable. That is to say, the desire to change his situation in Venezuela for the sake of the people of Venezuela. But the issue is the way it was done and what are the rules that govern this kind of behavior from the point of view of the American military operation that was undertaken to seize him and bring him to justice in the United States. And the point I'm trying to make is that, yes, the U.S. Courts have jurisdiction to deal with a guy like Maduro, provided he's in the United States. That part is not a problem. The case law goes way back to 1800s, saying, well, yeah, there's, everything is fine on that front. But the international law problem that arises is where we're going to have some difficulty. And the international law basically is the UN Charter, which says that nations should not intervene in the sovereign affairs of other nations. And then there's sovereign immunity, which protects leaders customarily in international law from being attacked or brought to or arrested for whatever conduct they are charged with while they are leaders, because of the precedent that sets in terms of constraining the leaders of countries from undertaking their duties as leaders, no matter how bad the leaders are. So, in a nutshell, the concern is the precedent that was set when America sent in uh, a military operation to arrest Maduro, who's the head of a foreign state, intruding into that state's sovereign jurisdiction to seize him and extricate him from there to bring him to justice in the United States. That part is a concern. A concern maybe not so much about Maduro, but a concern about what this means for nations other than Venezuela, and indeed even Venezuela in the future. And what I have in mind are the other nations that Trump has stated are potential targets, namely Greenland, which is a sovereign state, part of Denmark, Mexico, Colombia, and ultimately even Canada. And looking at it from this cascading possibility of military intrusions into these countries for ostensibly emergency reasons could, and Churchill has a wonderful adage about this, which is that, I'm just paraphrasing, but the essence of it is that the more a dictator intrudes in the affairs of another country, the more appetite he has to do it more, again and again. Witness prelude to World War II, starting with Austria, Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, Poland, and the launch into World War II, where 50 million people died as a result of World War II, largely because the sovereign affairs of nations, their sovereignty was not respected in Europe at that time. So it's a slippery slope, as they say in legal terms, to descend into possible hell.
Yes. So, what do you think the slippery slope truly is that other countries like China and Russia basically may feel they have the green light to do the same thing?
Well, take Russia, for example. We've talked about Russia. In Russia's case, they launched a military operation. Think Trump launched a military operation. In Russia's case, they expected it would take about 3 days to decapitate the leadership in Kiev and bring about the suppression of Ukraine into Russia. In the United States, the military operation was again designed to seize, or similarly designed to seize, the leader of the country and bring him to the United States for justice purposes. Indeed, there is an American expert, Fiona Hill, who detected way back in 2019, I believe, that there was apparent agreement between Putin and Trump to the effect that, here, you give me Ukraine, Putin says to Trump, and I'll allow you to take Venezuela. So as far back as 2019, Fiona Hill, who is one of the leading experts in America on international affairs, and was talking about the war in Ukraine, at least she detected, and it seems like what has happened is, internationally speaking, there's either an unspoken or perhaps private agreement between superpowers, namely the United States, Russia, and China, to divide the world into 3 hemispheres: North America for Trump and America, Europe for Putin and Russia, and the Far East for China. And the basic apparent agreement is, you can do whatever you want in your sphere, but don't intrude in our sphere, and vice versa. That's where
Yeah.
we're headed.
So, you write about the law of the jungle. Can you go into that and what you mean by that?
Yeah. At the end of world, I mentioned, listen, it boils down to this. We fought 2 world wars over borders. World War I, where 30 million people died. World War II, where 50 million people died. It wasn't the only issue, but it was a major issue of those 2 wars. Either we respect each other's borders or we don't. And if we don't, the consequences are severe. World War were the consequences. And at the end of World War II, we finally said, the parties who, the countries that concluded World War II said, look, we're setting up the United Nations to prevent any further aggression of this nature from taking place. And the agreement was reached, and I cited in my article as one of the articles of the United Nations, that you cannot use military power to take border, land from a neighboring state. Like, we respect each other's sovereignty and independence. And so they set up an international rules-based order that has basically patrolled and regulated our affairs for the last 80 years in Western Europe and North America, South America, etc. By and large, that has held. And NATO was formed in order to protect Europe and the United States and Canada from a potential invasion from the Soviet Union and later Russia, to the point where, following World War II, towards the end of World War II, Berlin broke out as a big issue. Germany had fallen apart, and the Allied forces had divided Germany, but Berlin was in Eastern Germany, under Eastern European, that is to say, Eastern German Soviet occupation, but was supposed to be jointly administered between the United States, Great Britain, France, and Russia. And there was a heightened state of concern about how Berlin is to be handled. And in the discussions and in the history there, it became clear that the Western allies were concerned that the Soviet Union's plan was to dominate all of Europe, to militarily and in some way gain a foothold and a superiority over all of Europe, not just Berlin, not just East Germany, but all of Europe. And they had to fight tooth and nail to keep things in order, and ultimately, somehow they resolved the Berlin crisis, which led to this sort of peaceful, long period of time, 80 years, where there were no major incidents related to border clashes until Putin invaded Ukraine in 2014, when he took over Crimea, which was 12 years ago. And that simmering conflict continued until February 2022, when Putin went all in the invasion of Ukraine. So in that hemisphere, the rule of law is no longer respected, at least from the point of view of Russia,
Yep.
that feels, well, we could just march in and take over. And in the Western hemisphere, we're seeing almost the identical thing, where the United States has decided, well, we're going to just step into Venezuela and take it over. Not just extricate a criminal, quote unquote, because of narco trafficking and so on, and prosecute that criminal in a U.S. court. But more than that, we're going to do a regime change, like in Ukraine, where Putin is saying, we're going to change. We don't want Zelensky. He needs to be replaced by someone else. Regime change. So we got this regime change in Ukraine, in Europe, and regime change in Venezuela. But the big concern is, this is the prelude. This is if you want it in World War II historical terms, this is a prelude. This is Hitler invades Austria, first step towards World War II. Then comes the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, all of Czechoslovakia, Poland, and ultimately World War II. The problem is, Trump has already stated Greenland's next. Then on the short list is Colombia, and the other country is Mexico, and finally Canada. I just might mention, in respect to Canada, Canada has no serious troops to defend itself against an invasion by the United States. Canada's defense totally relies on, or almost totally relies on, respect for the international rules-based order and custom and international law, the stuff we're talking about here, that you can't just invade another country. You have to follow a procedure or respect the laws that are there, the rules that are there, if you're going to try something like this. Either get a resolution from the Security Council, which is impossible because the United States has a veto, or prove that there's some ingredient of self-defense involved, which is one of the ostensible arguments America could try, saying that their self-defense is at stake here. Not very solid argument, etc. That's in the Western Hemisphere. But in the Eastern Hemisphere, Putin has invaded Ukraine, but he doesn't want to stop there. He's on the record as saying he wants to restore, that the decline or the disillusionment of the Soviet Union was the greatest catastrophe of the last century. His view is, and on the record he has said, he wants to restore the former glory of the Soviet Union and, the honor of Stalin in that context. And China, as for China, it has not yet exhibited the aggressiveness shown in the other two theaters. But Taiwan is extremely vulnerable at this moment to China. And Xi, the leader of China, has ordered his army. He's not made a declaration he's going to invade Taiwan, but he has ordered his army, the People's Republic Army, Red Army, that it must be ready by 2027 to undertake an invasion of Taiwan. So we're, it appears, on the verge of a possible invasion of Taiwan within the next year or so in that theater. And that's where we find ourselves at the moment.
So, yeah, well, very sobering. Well, thank you for all of it. Just a few thoughts. Do you think that we have a rules-based order, but ultimately, does it mean anything if it can't be enforced? And who would be doing the enforcing? If I think most people would say the U.S. is supposed to be the democratic leader of this planet, right, and supposed to lead by example. Colin Powell used to have a statement, something to the effect that when we fought in Europe, we only wanted enough land to lay our dead. We weren't there to take and conquer land, like the Nazis were trying to do. That we were there for a different, more hopeful mission. And so there's, the whole beacon city on the hill, kind of idea from Reagan. So I often think, yes, rules-based order, but at the same time, if it's not going to be guaranteed by some kind of ultimate power, superpower like the U.S., then it's going to descend to laws of the jungle.
That's a good point. A few thoughts on that point. NATO was formed to defend Western Europe and North America from Soviet and then Russian aggression. It was a mechanism, an international mechanism to enforce international law. Russia saw NATO as a threat to its conquering ambitions. So that's one way that one could enforce international law. Another very disturbing element of what's going on right now is in the case of Greenland and then ultimately Canada, they are both members of NATO,
Yeah.
and so is America. But unfortunately, through Trump, under Trump, America appears to be ready to dissolve NATO and the whole concept of collective defense for the sake of expanding its influence in Greenland and then ultimately in Canada. And it's ever so innocent. It's and it was innocent when Hitler was taking over Austria. Indeed, it was said, well, they want to be taken over. And indeed, in Czechoslovakia, the explanation was, well, the Sudetenland is all German people, and they're being mistreated by Czechoslovakia. So it's proper for Germany to get the Sudetenland. And then when it came to Poland, there was, red flag incidents that justified Hitler going into Poland. We have a similar kind of a scenario going here. How the United States was, until recently, the linchpin from the point of view of esteem and status. It was the model that the whole world pointed to show what democracy was all about and what kind of faith people had in that society and what that society stood for in terms of law and order and, justice, if you want to put it that way. This adventure into Venezuela is a disturbing upheaval of America's place in global affairs. Now we cannot point to America as the model or the sort of the country that is leading the democratic world in terms of the rules that we live by. So lawlessness, like America is turning from a legal, law-based, rule-based country into forgive me, I don't want to say it, but it's kind of like almost like a gangster land where someone in power who administers his affairs without regard to the Constitution and the laws of the society is prepared to exert his power wherever he can and wherever he thinks it's appropriate. So, I mean, maybe I'm maybe I'm overstating the case, but it's worthy of consideration, what's going on and the conduct exhibited in Washington
Okay. Yeah. Last
is
thing.
worthy of consideration in this kind of context.
So what would you say to those, let's say, the Venezuelan Americans who are celebrating that Maduro has been removed because the United States, for all its attempts to liberate, other societies in ways that have not gone so well, um, it's generally still seen as a good motivation, right, to take down dictators and free people from tyranny. So for the people, the 8 million or so Venezuelans who left um, Venezuela because of Hugo Chavez, because of Maduro, what would you say to them? How do we reconcile the mission to free people with not intervening?
Uh, listen, I'm not God. I don't have all the answers. I'll tell you that right now. However, I will say, shall we say, there's two ways to do it, the right way and the other way. The wrong way to do things, let's draw a very simple example. You're dating a girl. One way is to just take a kiss and just help yourself. The other way is to treat the person properly. Same goal, same, sort of direction, but conduct matters. If you don't respect your own rules, who's going to respect the rules? You have to respect your own rules. It's, as Churchill pointed out, the democracy is messy. It's very difficult to be a Democrat. But so I agree. Listen, getting rid of Maduro, fantastic, because he was a dictator, and all the butchery and everything under his rule was a disaster for Venezuelans. Thank God he's gone. But there's a way to do this properly, such as, for example, support the democratic process in Venezuela, respect the leaders that are in the opposition, respect the guy who won the election, even though Maduro stayed in power. He's the rightful person, it seems, to be put in charge of Venezuela. And it's going to be sloppy no matter which way you go. I'm sure there'll be all kinds of, but we as Americans, if you want to put it that way, we haven't done so well in terms of regime change. Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, examples of sloppiness. And one might add, probably for the same reasons. It's better to support people in the country involved and the freedom fighters or the Democrats of the society and the people who respect the rule of law and try to displace a dictator. That's the way it seems it would be the best way to deal with this situation. Now that it's done, the question is, what can America do to be a positive influence in Venezuela? Well, regime change and installing your own leaders in there and taking out the oil for America, etc. Shall we say that is not a good signal for Venezuela, nor is it for America, and nor is it for those batters who are on deck and next, who expect to be facing America's adventurism next.
Yeah, well, I definitely agree. That's going to leave a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, especially Venezuelans. Yeah, I totally am with you. Okay, Andy Semotiuk. Yeah, go ahead, Andy. You want to close us out with
I was just
any
going to mention, I know you're interested in Haiti.
Of course.
And America hasn't done too well in Haiti either.
Yeah, that's a whole another discussion. Yeah, the U.S. occupied Haiti for at least 20 to 30 years, back in the early parts of the last century, primarily because the justification was, German U-boats, right, in the Caribbean. And but the Monroe Doctrine, which I was having this long discussion about in Kenya, of all places, just some weeks back during Thanksgiving, where I was explaining to some people what it was and how it was last, up in everybody's knowledge around missile crisis in the 1960s, with JFK. And for those of us who are nerds and who study this stuff, we don't really talk about it, but it was interesting to hear it come out of the president's mouth just this past weekend. It was being used as a pretext, as a justification of, hemispheric dominance. And it has been used, and it was one reason Haiti was, invaded. But that's, again, a whole long discussion.
Yeah.
And so we can definitely visit another day, but certainly need to get your thoughts on Ukraine, because the peace attempts have gone nowhere, and
Right.
which is unfortunate. You know, a lot of people started feeling there might be some promise in this, but where we are now is a little bit, unknown, especially after Putin's residence got attacked, which who knows if that was false flag or whatever,
Yeah.
or just as another pretext to, do further incursions. So it's always ongoing. So thank you so much, Andy. I will leave you by screen sharing one more time the the first page, which is Forbes.com. You can go and check out Andy's articles, including this one that he is publishing. And of course, you can check out his law firm, pacelawfirm.com, where he works as an immigration attorney. All right, Andy Semotiuk, thank you so much.
Mac, it was a pleasure to talk to you again, and anytime.
Absolutely. All right, take care.
Okay.